have to give our children the tools, and we have to believe in them. I am tired of people telling me what kids can't do. What they can't do MCAS, they can't do this, they can't do that. No, when I was a kid, they were like, you know what, you're gonna have to be better. You're gonna have to work twice as hard or 10 times as hard in order to prove yourself. It's in you, get it done. And to me, and if we don't do that, and it's not a system that's going to do that, it's us stopping on the street and talking to the young lady or talking to the young guy. I mean, we sort of walked away from that. Nobody's going to care if we don't care.
It is really my pleasure to welcome you into our organization this evening as we bring you into what we call our living room of the community to have a very important dialogue about race and education. And the timing of this, I think, is so important. We just came off the MLK weekend, and we've got an inauguration, which is going to happen this Friday, and many of us have some feelings about that. So coming together to build community is really important, I think, at this time that we are in our country's history. Over the summer, I was reflecting on some of the things that were happening this summer with the increasing police violence that we just continue to hear about. Another shooting, another murder of an unarmed black man. And just feeling frustrated by the fact that these things are continuously happening and that there's not enough conversation and connection happening to really understand and grapple with why are we still having this problem in our country around race? Why is it that we have seen, and tonight we're talking about education, but why are the disparities continuing to exist in our country given all the efforts that so many of us are doing? Why is inequality still a part of our world? And just as someone who is in this work, working at United South End Settlements, it's just weighing on me. And then I ended up having a personal situation happen. I don't live in the city, I live outside of the city, and it came to my attention that our school district separates children who are of African descent into certain clusters in the middle school. And my children, I'm biracial, married to a white man. Our children are multiracial, and our children look differently. And we had one child who was put in a certain cluster because of the color of her skin, and another child put in another cluster because of the color of his skin. And so this was a moment for me that was a wake-up call in many ways of, you know, this is real. I do this work, I know it's real, but now it's happening to me and my family, and it's literally about the color of someone's skin. We've got to do something about this. This has to stop. And so I wanted to put on a forum so we can selfishly, in many ways, have this conversation, because it's not just about my children. It's about so many children in this city and across our state and across the country that are put at unfair disadvantages all of the time. So I'm really thrilled to see we have other folks who are also interested in this conversation, and that we've got an amazing panelists. Can we just give them a round of applause for being here tonight? Good to see you with you, gentlemen. The mic is on. So with us tonight, we have Ron Dorsey, we have Marie St. Fleur, and Robert Lewis Jr. And I'm just excited to convene this conversation, and I'm going to start, and I will sit down in just one moment, but I'm going to start with a question that is going to hopefully just help us understand the lens in which brings you to this conversation. So if each of you could spend just a couple of minutes describing what brings you to this conversation and the lens that you might have as you're looking at this from both your professional worlds, your personal worlds, your own educational experiences, that would be a great way for us to go ahead and get started.
Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Good. I'm Ron Dorsey. I'm the Chief of Education for the City of Boston. Before I tell you a little bit about myself, first of all, Maicharia, I want to thank you for organizing this, and Mari for organizing. It's also a privilege to be sitting here with family as well. So Marie and Robert have basically raised me in a lot of ways. We're on each other's teams in a lot of respects, so thank you, and it's a privilege to be with you tonight. Personal history, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, so I come to this conversation first as a black male in America, but being a Detroiter is a special kind of blackness, which I'm very proud of, and I'll talk a little bit more about what it meant to grow up in Detroit, Michigan in the 70s and 80s and how it shaped a kind of agency that I think I come to the work with, but also the way that even though I've been in Boston for 20 years permanently and went to high school here, I went to an independent school in Concord, Massachusetts, I still come to this work as a bit of a transplant. I still come to the city as a bit of a transplant. And Boston has ways of letting you know that you're not from here, but that's all right, because I never intended to give up my Detroiter status. But I do take a great deal of pride in living in and working for the city of Boston and for young people in Boston. So part of the story I will tell, one is as a young person in independent schools, but also as a black male, black professional living in the city, first as a public policy researcher, then a philanthropy executive, and now working on the mayor's team. And so there are a lot of experiences that color how I approach the work, but I would say fundamentally the work for me is about community building more than it is about the policy area that I'm in.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm actually delighted to be here with you as well. 4 days, almost 3 days after the 88th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and then 1 day before the inauguration of our 45th President of the United States. And so I think it is great that we're having more conversation, more dialogue, and that it's an opportunity, one, for me, sometimes it's just good to get that wake-up call. If we've been asleep, then I hope you're all awake now. I came to this country when I was 6 years old. When I immigrated, my parents had us back in the late 60s. We were first introduced, family had been living in Asbury Park, New Jersey since the 40s, 50s. So, Haitians tend to immigrate for various reasons. So if you read the history, you'll understand why some of the family members had to leave. We had dictators. And so sometimes when you see what's happening, it's very frightening. When the press is challenged and all those things are happening, it makes you nervous. So when I arrived, my parents, my mother's experience was that of a Catholic schools. And if you were black and you were from the West Indies back in those days, your predominant religion was Catholicism, raised as Catholic, still am. I guess folks will call you whatever kind of Catholic you want, but I embrace my faith. But my parents wanted to put us in Catholic schools. So we show up, but my name is Saint Fleur. So there's a lot of assumptions if it's not your parents who go and register you, but a friend went to register us. So we show up, because back in those days, you get off the plane, Pan American, no longer exists, right? And then, they take you to school. You just, you sink or swim. They didn't realize what we looked like. And so we were escorted out. We were told it was nice, but they couldn't have us in school. But I could receive the sacrament, because I would be turning 7 in a few months, and I was welcome to be part of that. My father walked out of the Catholic Church at that point and you think he stepped foot, and I think I got married, and he stepped foot in once. He became a Baptist. My mother had a totally different reaction. She said, my mother was Catholic, grandmother was Catholic. I'm not Catholic because of these people. I'm Catholic because of my faith. Nobody pushes me out of my faith. That's the message she gave us. She picked up the phone. She had some friends here, and they said, oh, please come. So St. Patrick's in Roxbury. So I got enrolled at St. Patrick's in Roxbury and began my education. And shortly thereafter, we had busing in Boston. So that's my welcome into understanding, walking from a place where everyone around me really looked like me, standing up and showing up in a place where nobody really looked like me. The language is very different. The weather was very different. And then adjusting. So all this to say, we all walk into this issue of race from different lens and from different experience. And so we shouldn't be making assumptions about how every black person experiences race in this country or react to it in this country. And I think for Boston, that's the place that we have to get to, is not just understand race in terms of black and white, but also understanding that the cultural, some of the cultural issues that come up for you as it relates to race. So I was always told that, yeah, you're black, you're gonna be black for the rest of your life, and this system wasn't built for you. And so you're just gonna always have to push your way through. So I didn't come up expecting that I'd be accepted, but respected. I mean, and that was it. And I think that's the approach that I've taken. So people will either like me or they don't, but I think you're open to respect everybody. And then you work through those systems. And so I love to engage in the conversation from that perspective, and I thank you for the opportunity today, Maicharia.
We love you, Marie. We don't just like you, we love you. I'm gonna be honest, it's cool to be up here. Maicharia, thank you so much, and I shared this when I walked in, this is where I used to be as a teenager, in this building here, and when the pool halls used to be across the street. I knew that because that's where my dad and uncles hung out. If some folks who remember Tremont and Washington, the old fruit stand and shoe shine spot, that was my uncle's. So when I'm walking around, I get some flashbacks, but also there's some memories too because of what was and what isn't. Ron, as you said, we're all brothers and sisters, man, and some may not accept folks, but I just turn around and say, I think our city is just looking for folks to get things done. Mm-hmm. I have a different story. My family and my mom and dad come from the Deep South. And mom and dad came to Boston. My mom was 14, my dad was 18 when they got legally married. We were the first black family in East Boston in 1960. The first black. The first black. It was cool when the second family moved in, the third, fourth, fifth. Marie talked about busing. You can read about busing, and I can tell you about busing. See, because May 13th of 1976, I had dinner at my best friend's house, and we had meatballs and lasagna. He was white. May 13th, 1976. May 14th, 1976, he threw a Molotov cocktail bomb through my window. And folks in East Boston asked him, are you an N lover or are you one of us? So folks, I moved to Villa Victoria in 76, right? I got firebombed out my home. 20 black families got firebombed out their homes in East Boston. We did not get bussed in, that was home. So when I moved to Villa Victoria, I got a letter that told me I would be bussed to East Boston High. So folks, true story, every day I'd walk from here to the old Dover, took the train to State, took the train to Maverick, and for 2 years, a police officer met me at Maverick and escorted me to school. See, I knew what it was like to be a junior and senior with 100 cops in the school. I knew what it was like to look out the windows to see the buses tip when the first set of black folks actually came in to East Boston High School. Before my junior year, East Boston, I had 1,500 students, 1,475 were white, 20 were black, 3 were Latino, and 2 were Asian. My high school looked like Saturday Night Fever, and that's not to be funny because it was. So I knew the experience of not a book education, but a social education. Every day you walk out to school, and there's thousands of people rallying. The advantage I had is that I played sports. And that was one of the advantages I had. And I met the school buses when I was a kid. And it might sound funny, but I said, hey, if you do anything with me and these folks, I'm going to transfer to Madison Park. But if you know East Boston High back in the day, if you played sports, it was a big deal. So folks, I lived it. I'm not reading about it in a newspaper. I'm not talking about it from a video. So my whole educational process was different. And then moving to the South End, and then moving into a Latino community. So I went from an all-Italian community to a Latino community. I remember what is it, 646 Tremont Street? The restaurant, anyone here remember when it was Eddie Kane's? Yeah, when it was Eddie Kane's. And when all of a sudden you'd walk down the street and you knew your neighbors and you knew your classmates and all of those things. And, so I get to this conversation because I'm shocked there wasn't an outrage of 20 black families being firebombed. There was no outrage. No outrage. I'm shocked that 25 guys I grew up with in Villa Victoria, none of us live in the South End. Not one of us. Not one of us. And then when I come back home, to be honest, I'm excited, but want to make sure that I feel like it's home for anyone who's the new South Ender, because I'm old. And it's interesting how many folks will call me the new. So I come here because every day I have this conversation. Every day I understand what it's like to be a black man in philanthropy, giving away $16 million when people were stunned that I was probably smart enough or equipped enough to do that. And if I guess one other thing I would come to this conversation is that, with somebody was the first executive director of City Air and have run major organizations, I'm almost tired of everyone asking me to recommend board members who are only black. I know white folks too. I don't think I can remember in the last 20 years that anyone asked me to recommend a board member who's white. So I only share that because part of this is being up front. We don't know who's in the room. We don't know the status of what they carry. And what we find out is if we spend a little bit more time, we might find we're more alike than unalike. So that's what brings me to the conversation.
Thank you all for sharing that. I'm almost lost with words just thinking about the experiences that many of you just shared right now, and thinking about where we are today and what's going to happen after this week and what's going to be that urgency. There was no urgency you spoke of, Robert, and so I'd love to just hear your thoughts on, I've been struggling with this as well. Marie and I had a conversation too just about urgency. Here we are, 2017, and we have a president-elect who is unprecedented. The behaviors and things that have happened, we haven't seen this before. And there's reaction, but I'm not feeling that sense of urgency that we've seen in other times during, the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. and what he stood for, and it was life or death, and today we can sit in a room that's very diverse. We can all come together and be in this room among diversity. There are things that have changed where we can do things. It's my personal experience of, waking up and realizing, putting my kids in separate clusters because of their race still exists today. I'm not safe from it. Thought I was in a community where I was safe, but I'm not. And would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives. I'm going off script here now, but of around urgency. Where are we with the urgency? What's your take on this? And anyone, feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in. So I actually think that there's a great deal of urgency, but there's a great deal of fear and paralysis as well. So, when I woke up at about 3 a.m. the evening or the morning of the election and realized that they had called it, there was like a collective heart palpitation that happened for folks. And so all folks talked about the next day was, my God, how did this happen, how this happened? And so you sort of get the paralysis and the fear-stricken nature of it. I mean, we're seeing folks mobilize, but I think a couple of things I would advise and maybe warn as we enter a Trump presidency. First of all, the mobilizing that we do and the way that we use our voices, take Trump to task for the things that are Trump's. What we have to be careful of, that there's a fine line between that commentary and attacking the Americans who elected him. And we have to be careful about that. There's a resistance to be done towards some of what the president-elect is proposing, but there's a lot of bridge building to be done with a huge portion of the country who said they're unhappy for a variety of reasons, and we don't fully understand it. The morning after the election, I woke up and I told my wife, I was like, we need to move to Kansas. I need to move back to Michigan. I need to move to the UP. and really understand how some of those voters and people in small places and people who have been disaffected, dispossessed, and are now disillusioned feel, because it's not necessarily my narrative, but I need to understand some of that narrative. By way of a quick story, right after 9/11, most of my family's from Dayton, Ohio. So I went to Dayton, Ohio for a family gathering, drove back to Detroit with my mom. Dayton, Ohio, American flags everywhere. You know, it's the patriotic moment following 9/11. We hit the city limits between Dayton, Ohio and Toledo, Ohio, nothing but Confederate flags. Lined the highway. Drove through Toledo, all American flags. Between Toledo and Detroit, nothing but Confederate flags all along the highway. I was clear that this is where I live. There is a dichotomy and an extremism to the political view, but I think the hope that I take out of it is those people felt the way they felt before 9/11, and they're some of the people that I grew up with, and I know. I mean, I grew up around the corner from Ted Nugent's nephews, and we had a good time together. And family had different political views, but there was a certain level at which we were able to connect as human beings. And so I think we have to be mindful of the way that we're going to use our resistance and not ignore the bridge building. Secondly, I think the urgency is around playing defense. There's a lot of offense to be played. Now, defense is going to be necessary. I mean, if you look at the Affordable Care Act and other things that are coming down the line, but I guarantee you a lot of decision-making is about to become hyper-local. There are things that the Trump administration is going to ignore, just because I actually don't think that he has enough sense to pay attention to some of the things. But there are other things that he said that he's kind of got an abject disregard for, and that I think states' rights will be invoked to make those hyper-local discussions. That means we have to build some things. The thing that concerns me about some modern-day organizing is that we don't make a clear enough distinction between mobilizing and organizing. And so mobilizing is making sure that we build the critical mass, a voice that says there is an injustice here, there is something that we need to remunerate. But the organizing is actually building the systems that are the alternatives to the unjust practices. And so great example of that is the credit union movement. But oftentimes we think that if we've mobilized, that we've organized. Maybe it's the first step and it's needed. But at the same time, we're going to have to build the alternatives to the things that are unjust. And in a context that may become more hyper-local, I think there's huge opportunity in that.
So my reaction is, yeah, there is urgency, but not really. This happened under our watch. So everyone says, oh, it's this voter or that voter. No, it's us. It's us. And we have to, each of us have an obligation to examine ourselves, you know, because something happened in America under our watch where there is such disconnect. So the laws got changed, right? So, yep, I got to go to school. I got to go to sit in classrooms with folks who were white. I got to go to university. I got to go to law school, and I'm grateful for all of that. I got to be able to have my kids go to schools like your children now go to school. We pull them out of their neighborhoods and take them other places so that they could go to a better school. So we averted, those of us who got the opportunity, got a chance to jump over some of the structural things that still exist without really dealing with them. Just because you change laws doesn't mean you change hearts. We've never bothered to go back to the business of changing hearts. I think that's what MLK was doing. He was trying to change hearts because he knew that even though the laws were passed, there were people who were going to implement those laws. And so they could be done superficially, or they could actually really believe that it is part of the American fabric, that these things had to be done because they believed that there was this mirror. So when they saw that mirror and they saw a black child like me, they saw themselves in me. But that didn't happen. So that happened under our watch. And so I love it when we sort of point like this. It's not a liberal or a conservative thing. I hate to say it, it's all of us. and we really need for us to be honest about where we go next, we need to think about that. I actually one of the things I did is I kind of disconnected for a little bit because I think I needed to, because I was going. Because when you're going all the time, we don't have time to reflect and to really think about who we are, where we're going, and why we do the things that we're doing. I'm motivated. I love to help people. Great. But what does that really mean? What's really impactful? Does it really change anything? I spent some time, I've been working on early ed, and I've been spending time in Georgia. Because everybody's talk about poverty. I grew up in Upham's Corner. I'm so proud of that. Upham's Corner, everybody always laughs, but I love Upham's Corner. All the things that have happened to me in life, Upham's Corner prepared me for. All the slights I received by folks, we talk about walking back and forth because you don't have enough money to pay for that Kane Square bus. So you're walking, because I went to school at MRM. So that's right in Southie. Okay? So I'm walking from Upham's Corner up in Dorchester down every day. You have folks throwing things at you, saying stuff to you, and you put on your armor. And you walk through and you do it. People write nasty things and carve it on your desk. Your mother goes back and says, well, look, guess what? You're there for an education, not to make friends. Put on your armor. I learned that in Upham's Corner. And you know what? The same people, and when you're an immigrant, before you speak the English right, you get it from all sides. So you learn to respect people for the way they treat you. My father always say to me, they come at you nice, come at them nice. They come at you different, cross-eyed, go at them cross-eyed. Doesn't matter who people are. You treat them with respect because they respect you. So I go from that space. I go back, and I'm in Georgia, and I go into a place, and I'm wondering if I'm in America. Because I spent a lot of time in Haiti. I've been to Soweto. And I'm in a place where I see kids, not black kids, white kids, living in a trailer with a corrugated roof, where the plastic is their front door, where a dog is their alarm. Now you want to ask me why these folks shouldn't be angry? Where there's no real education available to them. We've got a problem in America. It's black, it's white, it's poverty, and we need to really, really examine ourselves in our comfort as we point fingers. So race is yes, it's real. The structural things have been dealt with. We have not changed hearts. We've all gone into our little corner, and I can be quite comfortable and not see anything. I take my little kids to their little soccer games. I take them to their play dates, and when I get a little bit, we can go to the theater. We do all of that. And we get immune to what's happening because we've created an America where all our friends are the same, having the same experiences, and our kids are not experiencing any other thing. And so therefore, we could be totally blind to what's happening with others. So for me, yes, racism is structural. Those are the laws, the policies that exist at which we must continue to dismantle in order to create that equal playing field. It's also overt. It could be overt. You call me out of my name, I call you out of your name, or I give you my resume, and the minute I walk out, you throw it in the garbage. Had that happen? Anybody in this room ever had that happen, and you know what's happened? Zip codes. Come on now. So it's happened to you? So yes, it could be that too. But now it's gotten, in a lot of ways in Massachusetts and in Boston, it's real subliminal. So you can't really call it. And then if you call it, then you're not sure that's what it is, right? And so then we all looking at each other, not sure what to call it. So that's how deep it's gotten. And so we need to think about what is it that's keeping us from having real conversations about who we are, having our kids be able to experience culture really, not just in a superficial way. We call them to have them a volunteer day at some school where they paint, or where they tutor a kid for a couple of days, but really having them understand that child's life so that we understand each other at the human level. And when we begin to get at who we are at the human level, we can then make certain that when I give you my application, no matter what I look like, you're going to look at my credentials for what they are, not judged by the fact that, you make a decision right away about who you think I am. Because this whole idea that we're judged by our character is not really real yet. Because until you really believe in me. So, and the other thing I want to say is our kids experience this differently. Because my kids have a different kitchen table than I had. Around my kids' kitchen table, it wasn't just black. My kids' kitchen table was black, it was white, it was gay, it was straight. They had a whole different, so you can't talk to them about race from the same perspective. And they're in their 20s. You know what I'm saying? So this is a very complex issue. And so it's the humanity of us that I think we need to really deal with.
Robert, before you jump in,
Sure,
can I make
please.
a quick observation? Marie said that there was a lot that happened under our watch. Two things I want to bring up. And actually, we saw this in the second Bush election as well. Our imagination for agency has a limit. And after the election season, it was just like all ideas about how community level, regional, and national change can and should happen. It was like it vacated our heads. It came up here again. Secondly, so under our watch, we've really got to figure out how do we fill in that void of the really effective work we need to be doing locally. Perhaps equally importantly, under our watch, we allowed basically the culture, certainly the opponents of the White House, to basically say, because a black man is in the seat, the presidency means very little. And so you get Donald Trump. And we're all implicated in that. You can disagree with President Obama's policies, you can have a critique, and we all should have a critique, but you can defend the man and defend the office and defend the democracy at the same time, and we did not do that.
I think your question about a sense of urgency, there's so much as I'm listening goes through my mind. And some of my friends who are here, don't yell at me. I actually thought Trump was going to win.
Yeah, no, my sister
I
told
thought
me that
Trump was
6
gonna
months
win.
ago. Yeah.
And it's not because I was supporting him. There just didn't seem to be this energy when I was watching, and I'd seen Trump's rallying people. He's rallying pissed off people. I can go to New York and probably kill somebody and I can still get elected. And we all laughed at that, and he got elected and he could say things. So the sense of urgency, I didn't wake up pissed off. Man, I've been struggling with Ferguson. I haven't dealt with that yet. Like, I'm struggling with what's happening around this country. So I can't wake up the next day and all of a sudden I feel differently when I'm working with 500 young people who are struggling every day with issues that are affecting them. So the adults kept asking me, Robert, go ask the young folks what they feel. They must have an opinion. So we brought our young folks together at the base and asked them what they felt. They said a kid was stabbed at Brighton today, and one of our friends was killed in Mattapan last week. Why aren't you guys talking about that too? One of our friends was stabbed at Brighton today. One of our friends was killed last week. And you want to ask me about Trump, and I'm just trying to make things work, right? So eventually they may get to that. But this sense of urgency, I think, is across a lot of facts. The thing that does bother me, since Trump won, people used the N-word before Trump. People were racist, homophobic, sexist before him. And the only thing that I don't want to do is all of a sudden we don't look internally and we say it's about him is why the country's changed. I struggle with that. My friend Denise Korn was here. I was sharing something with Denise. After Trump, I got a call. I got invited to Davos by a couple of business leaders. It was great. And they were asking me, Robert, what do you feel? And I asked them, what do you feel? They wanted to know, was I pissed off? Why were they asking me if I was pissed off? I wanted to know, were they pissed off? And they were actually, you must be angry because Trump's in office. And it was a very interesting conversation because to some extent, because maybe I was African American, I'm supposed to be angrier than others. But I just found it interesting. I'm 56 years old. They never invited me to Davos until after Trump won. And they wanted to know how I felt. And I'm being serious. So these are the things that bother me. It's like, why now? We've been talking about Ferguson. We've been talking about urban education. We've been talking. I can't get funders and donors to come to Roxbury to want to talk. You know, I can't get folks to open up their doors. We want to make sure the zip codes of a young person doesn't prevent them from getting a job, right? You know, Ron and I have done work, right? Somebody wants to talk about things. I says we need to also talk about our young folks that are doing exceptionally well. Look, we have a chief of education, you know, who happens to be African-American, but has anyone ever looked to see how smart and talented Ron is? Ron's brilliant. That's why he's in the role. He's brilliant. You know, and I get tired of like almost having to play. I got to be honest. It's hard playing the black role. Folks, I'm being serious. It's hard asking me all the time what it's like, what my kids feel like, what's going on in Roxbury. Come hang out a little bit. You know, seriously, folks, I have to play in corporate. I'm in Wellesley. I can go into any suburban independent school and inspire those kids. Right? I don't need to be getting a pass. So this urgency for me is that, you know, this is only as cool as what the hell we do tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is only as cool as that. And what I want is that we're all the crusaders for good, right? We're all standing up. You know, we should be frustrated if it's Trump. I want to be frustrated also about our schools. I want to be frustrated about lack of jobs. I want to be frustrated about all those things. And folks, and it affects all of our kids. The thing I've learned, and I'll shut up, I went to speak at an independent school. And a bunch of the young folks were asking me questions, and some of the kids that were from the suburbs, and something I learned. Never really thought of it until they told me the impact and the effect they feel when a kid in Boston who's a classmate or someone they know gets shot. And all these young folks, and I can say it was BB&N. They were asking me, what do we do? What do we do, Robert? We're not from Roxbury, we're not from here. What do we do? And in some crazy way, they have a sense of urgency and pissed off. Folks, Boston Latin isn't new. It took two young, heroic young women to step up and turn around and put something in front of us that we, in a weird way, didn't want to confront. But guess what? It's our young folks again. Look at what's happening around the rallies in America. It's our young folks again. So I guess when I think of that sense of urgency, I'm kind of pissed off, but to be honest, I'm inspired by a sense of young folks who are rising. I'm inspired by people who are willing to step up. I'm inspired that people are willing to hit the streets. I'm also saying, folks, sometimes we don't have to go to Washington, D.C. We might just have to do Columbus Ave. Columbus Ave is home. You know, not that you don't have to go to D.C., but let's turn around and make sure Columbus Ave, Tremont Street, Dudley are places that we're also figuring this out. So there's a sense of urgency on so many factors, but I also think that, you know, one of those things is that our young people have to be better every day than what they are today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. So just switching gears and really thinking about our young people and education here in the city and across the state, and knowing that this isn't new, as you said, right? This is not new. These are a lot of the same issues that we have been facing for decades, centuries, with our young people and around race and education. And so I'd love to hear from our panelists your thoughts, and given the work that each of you are in and have been in, just what do we need to do around education of our children? You mentioned Boston Latin is not new. I'm in a suburb with a very strong school district, and yet the racial disparities in education are just as great. And so what is it that we need to do, and how do we act in order to really address these profound issues that continue to affect so many young people?
Usually I call Ron.
Call Ron.
Well, I got a couple of ideas. So, first of all, I think a few things to understand. We're probably, at least in the Boston Public Schools, I think, have our eye more trained on racial and gender equity than ever, and trying to think about what systemic bias looks like in the school system. And so, very much to his credit, our superintendent, Tommy Chang, dove in and started taking a look at advanced work, which is the elementary school level program, which basically based on a A third grade test determines tracking in the Boston public school system. And in 2014, when we did a study of the outcomes, the life outcomes, the academic outcomes of young boys of color, one of the things that study really highlighted was that starting at advanced work, you created a two-tier system in the Boston public schools, one that was headed for post-secondary experience and completion, and another that was headed nowhere. And most of our young boys of color were on that second tier because they were not a part of advanced work. They were not getting into the exam schools, which direct link between advanced work and exam schools, even though advanced work does nothing different than the general curriculum in terms of test scores. Almost nothing. And so it's kind of almost a shared mythology around the rigor of it, and that belief enabled a form of racial tracking in the system. So Dr. Chang kind of said we need to interrupt that. There is an Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force that has been working for about a year really to bring greater rigor to the set of equity policies in the Boston public school system and to start to do some remediation of practice and policy. But things don't change overnight, and if you know anything about the history of education, I mean, this is where we see kind of both personal and systemic bias kind of play out in its rawest forms. Sometimes there's a scholar by the name of Harold Cruz, who used to be at the University of Michigan and wrote a lot about civil rights, but what he talked about was the civil rights cycle. And so he didn't identify the 60s as the civil rights movement. What Harold Cruz talked about was there have been about 5 of these movements where there's a bit of progress, and then there's a backlash to the progress that happens on an almost cyclical basis, and you see it probably nowhere more transparently than in education systems. And so I think what we've got to realize is that we're both trying to keep the forward movement, and I think what has been mostly the positive long-term arc of the civil rights cycle, but also really figure out what's the ultimate disruption here, what actually stops the cycles. The challenge that I think I live with on a day-to-day basis in a place like Boston, where we had a pretty toxic district charter conversation and a whole lot of other things, I actually felt like that was a misplaced conversation and the wrong conversation. We've got to figure out, how is urban education going to be sustainable when urban education is going to be defined by schools of many types, whether they are district, parochial, independent, charter, and how are we going to guarantee that there's quality behind every door? A lot of it is going to have to take into account the diversity of interest, the diversity of background, and the diversity of need of our students. One of the problems in education is that a lot of education policy is race neutral, or it intends to be race neutral, which means that it's not equity explicit. So if we aren't serious about calling out where disparity actually is, we often our goal is to kind of get to equality, but equality and equity are not the same thing. And so we've got a set of equity challenges in front of us, and part of getting to those equity challenges is recognizing that you have to renegotiate privilege to get to equity. So there's a lot of talking with one another about what cultural advantage looks like, what socioeconomic advantage looks like, any variety of status advantage might look like, and ask ourselves the question, how are we going to level the playing field by renegotiating the privilege that some of us have? And all of us are privilege holders in some regard. I mean, especially in racial justice work, we'll talk about the effects of white privilege, but as a black middle-class male, and honestly as a young man who grew up in Detroit, Michigan, under a different social contract, and in a city where over 50% of black people are homeowners, 20% of black people in Detroit, Michigan make 5 times the poverty level, I came from a different background and understand who I am as a privilege holder, even though society doesn't see me as such. And even though there's a lot of things ascribed to me that I don't subscribe to myself. So my own privilege has to be negotiated, but when I'm in conversation with other people, one of the first questions I ask is, what are you going to give up for us to get to equity?
Just as a follow-up to this, and again, thinking about a personal situation we're going through is around this race-neutral policies, Brown versus Board, and making sure we're setting policies that stay within our Constitution. But yet there is this inequity, and we need to address it. How do you address it without using race? And then layering in on top of that unconscious bias and just the complexity there of trying to, for districts to set policies that are trying to reach this goal of equity. How do they do it in a way that takes into consideration all of those factors?
Not easily.
And I think for, like, how do we as parents, as community members, like, support that effort or are able to partner around it to ensure it is really equitable? And, you know, the intentions are good, but could have some damaging impacts.
Yep. So I don't want to dominate the conversation. You guys should certainly jump in. But one, I think the breakthrough for us collectively in Boston is that equity is consistently on the table in some regards. I do think that we have to arrive at the shared definition of equity again. So I laid out a few criteria about distinguishing equity and equality, the renegotiation of privilege, and you actually have to name names when you do this. You have to say that it's, you know, we've used the data well enough, or we've used observation enough to determine that it is about this group of young brothers who grew up in this part of the city that we have to figure out a solution for. And to say it in a way where it's not about saying we don't give anyone else anything else, but to agree that we've got to give these people disproportionately more to make sure that they get what they need. Without the kind of shared definition of equity, I think we'll spin our wheels a little bit. But I think we also have to be accepting of the fact that a lot of work around race is a little bit crude and clumsy. And I learned that coming from Detroit. So when I came to Boston from Detroit, like, all my friends and neighbors are like, why are you going to Boston? It's the most racist place in the world. But I went back home and I told them, well, here's the difference. We live in a city, 75% black. There are more black people here than there are people in Boston. We don't have to see race to some degree. We don't have to see a white person if we don't want to. What I appreciate about Boston is difference is so proximate that when the conflict comes up, you need to figure out how to settle it. The conflict, we're clumsy around it. We're still building the technology and the experience to deal with it in kind of elegant ways and in ways that get us to the lasting solutions that we need. So we're going to have to be tolerant a little bit as we're doing this work in the school system, that it's not going to be perfect. But we've got to keep putting equity on the table and asking, are we getting the equity result that we want? And I think be authentic about where we're coming from. Last thing I'll say is that the room has to be created for the people most affected to lead, or they've got to create the room for themselves. Let me spin it another way, because as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to ask anybody's permission to advocate for yourself and create the change that you need. We're also going to have to figure out what the white ally work looks like, and I think it's not clearly in view, but it's something that is evolving, I think, in some positive ways. But I will warn that for it to be positively effective, we're going to have to get to this conversation about privilege and disparity in some ways.
I agree with Ron. I also think it's as we all know, it's a very difficult conversation. And so while we may put the policy in that speaks about equity, it's the implementation that we always run into problems. And so while we may have a nice definition of equity on paper, then somebody has to implement that. And it all comes down to resources. Now, and we're very selfish people. Just put it that way. We see our children. I always say, okay, I got to take care of my child. And so and that's your focus. And so we've moved away from this idea that we are our brother's keeper. We are our brother's keeper. We are responsible for each other. I love the concept that I'm living in a commonwealth. You know what I mean? And we don't teach each other what that means anymore. You know, and so there's a reason why we created a constitution that made us responsible for some basic things for each other. There is a compact in that word commonwealth. And so therefore, we have to spend some time re-engaging people about what it means for us to live here. And what the commitment is that you make in choosing to come to live here in terms of our responsibility to each other. But that takes going back to some of those documents. We don't talk about, you know, I can get all the policies, but go back to what created us, and then we move forward from that. We don't spend time doing that anymore. We jumped right into the conversation without the framework, okay? And then I think we need to have each other understand each other again, because we say equity, and even if you're a middle-class family in Boston right now, you're struggling. You know, if I have a special needs kids in Boston right now and I'm trying to figure out, and I'm a middle-class family, I'm trying to figure out how to support them with all sorts of resources, it's hard to get me to hear that there's a kid in Roxbury who needs help. But we do need to figure out a way. I think it's a collective space to get people. It's not the data that's going to get to people. It's being able to see that other child in their child, and then figuring out a way how we do that together. And we don't have enough space anymore because, like I said, I'm going to go back to my neighborhood. You're going to go back to your neighborhood here. You're going to speak to the neighbors you speak to, the people that you interact with, the folks that you go to the cocktail party with, and then your life goes back as usual. You will not interact, many of you, with some of the very kids that we're talking about, and your families won't, you know? And so it's a distant connection. And so we have to figure out a way to change that, because even if I pass the law tomorrow, I pass the policy tomorrow, we're going to then then everybody gets ginned up for their thing, their position, their thing. And we haven't figure out a way to move out of that. So that's one. The dialogue has to be amongst a mixed group of people, and it has to be created. And that table has to be set for them in some ways because they're too busy. And we have to create the space for them to interact. And I think that's, you know, I'd go to New York and I'd look around, you know what it's like, or people talk about being black in this city, growing up black in this city. And then you'd go to downtown to go to eat. And, you know, I work in a building, I have friends from all cultures, all races, I love it. But then usually you're the only one. And then you're supposed to, because I look like I am who I'm supposed to be the expert on everybody. I'm an expert on Marie. I'm not an expert on all black people. That's not my calling is. But when you walk into the room, everybody expects that you have this answer, which I don't. You go to dinner. You guys think about your lives as you walk out. You go to dinner and you look around. You know, it's great to see people, but nobody looks like you. So you're in a constant state of isolation. Okay? And that's my world. Because and it gets a little frustrating and it gets a little lonely. Now, take it away from that and then think about your lives. You see each other. If you're white, you're spending time in a white world. In many instances. Your families, though we're having more and more mixed families, the people you go to dinner with, and you're spending it with people in your own income rank, oftentimes. So it's not malicious, it's just the way the world has now been constructed by how we're living. So we have to create spaces so that people can have that across. And even if I go to black folks, we all the same. It's the ski club, the scuba club, you know what I'm saying? It's Jack and Jill, it's whatever. So it's everybody in their own little group again, okay? And so then we think about, those poor black kids in Roxbury. This is black folk. Guys, we gotta be, if we want to change, we gotta be honest with what's happening.
Change ourselves.
Okay? We've gotta be honest. And so therefore, we have to take a hard internal look and figure out what some of the social structures that we're gonna create to allow us to be with each other, so that when that equity conversation comes to play, we can see each other and each other. And that's what we've stopped doing in this world today. And that's what we've stopped doing in Boston in a lot of ways. Our kids, though, and I'm talking about that younger group, because I've seen it in the independent schools where a lot of my kids spend time, they've actually, my daughter went to Beaver, and we got some Beaver kids there, all right? And she has an amazing set of friends. She's off, you know, she's in Australia now. They stay in touch. They got their little, they're from every place. And they don't want to come home. She doesn't want to come home because you know what? The things that I try to warn her about to prepare, because part of what we have to do as black folks, we have to give our kids, even when you give them a middle class experience, you have to prepare them for being rejected. And it is a tough thing as a parent to begin to tell your kid that you're going to be, no matter how educated you are, no matter how many friends you are, people are going to look at you and make some decisions about you before you even speak. So they were back a couple years ago. I have some friends, and something happened to one of my kids in Brookline. And you know what? One of her white friends said, you know, they're not going to believe you, Nikki. Just step aside. Let me handle this conversation. Because they could see it because they had spent the time together. And so they began to see when it was a racial issue. And they also they were frustrated by how their friend was being treated. That's a totally different experience than I had growing up, okay? And I, you know, being the only black kid in the neighborhood or in the school. So there's something that's happening for them that we in this generation, the folks who are in this room who did not have that kind of interracial or mixed experience, or who don't live in that mixed space, have to create, because those kids who live in Roxbury and Dorchester are just like your kids. What they don't have is some of the privileges of the resources. They don't. And we need to and that's that equity piece. It's an equity of resource, equity of opportunity, and we got to figure out, but society won't give up. Each of us don't want to give up our stuff. And we're not going to give up our stuff until we start having real conversations with each other. And we stop being real, and that is black and white, and see our responsibility in this. So it's structural, but it's also the soft stuff, because that's where it gets a problem, because the law gets passed. How many of you have written reports on all this issue? How many? And then it goes on a shelf somewhere, and nothing ever happens with it. How much data have we paid a nonprofit or a foundation has paid to generate data, right? And you get a beautiful report, you get a press release, it goes on a shelf, and then what happens to it? I'm sorry.
Dog, Marie, I was going to talk about some nonprofit.
So I'm just saying, we just really need to get real.
I don't have answers, and I wish I did, right? I've been, you know, some of these things we've been talking about for hundreds of years. We haven't figured out public education. We haven't figured out poverty. We haven't figured out race. We can send a person to the moon and back, but we have a hard time crossing the street and saying hello to our neighbors, right? So I have some thoughts. I wish there was a campaign, you know, and a strategy and a structure for the success of our young people. So we just, you know, there's this comprehensive commitment that our young people would get something. If it's educated, if it's health. We say we have some of the best hospitals in the world. Has anyone heard that in Boston? Has anyone heard that? I always say, for who? If I'm working with 500 young people and only 7% of black and brown boys get physicals, did you hear that? 7? Then for who? Right? And when we have the health center. So I just think there needs to be some comprehensive strategy for our young folks. There's something wild that we have more nonprofits than schools, principals, teachers. 15,000 nonprofits in Boston. 26,000 nonprofits in Massachusetts. 15,000 mission statements. 15,000 executive directors. And close to 15,000 facilities. We're talking about shifting a paradigm for young folks when we're spending more time making sure that heat and everything is being covered. So I think there needs to be something where nonprofit leaders, before philanthropy funds them, there needs to be something compelling. They have to do more than opening doors. I don't know if folks know, in Boston, 75% of youth-serving organizations are closed by 6. Did you know that? I'm asking, you know, so we need to know this, right? We need to know this because we're wondering where our kids are. At night you read the paper and say, why aren't these kids going and doing something productive? We're closed. So I think there needs to be something about 15,000 nonprofits that are serving like probably every child in our city. Ron and Marie should be speaking to every nonprofit leader before they get funded. Because here's the funniest thing. We probably have more youth workers in the city than teachers who don't get all this information we're actually transferring right now. We have youth workers who are actually educating our young folks, getting them ready for college, that have GEDs and high school diplomas. And I'm not being critical of them, but we're asking a set of folks that's only making $32,000 to $35,000 to educate a generation of young folks when they're not. So I just start to think, what do we do around the nonprofits? 15,000, it just blows me away. More nonprofit leaders than there are teachers. Leadership. Has anyone thought, how do we hold philanthropy accountable? Philanthropy is saying, we will fund you if you do some things, and then we compete, and what we'll do is we fight for crumbs, and what we do at the end of the year, we do annual reports, and all the annual reports say how great we are, and we still have problems. No, and folks, think of your own philanthropy. How many, think of it, it's the holidays. How many letters do you get from folks to fund my initiative and everyone? And here's the funniest thing. No one really says if they're good or not. They just say, hey, you know what? It's the time of giving. Maybe they're going to give now. Now, folks, I noticed because when I was running the Boston Foundation, running the grant aspect, I found it interesting that folks were talking about how do we solve big issues, but we don't do it collectively. So in my mind, I thought, is there a collective strategy around education in Boston, around health, and around food? When we look at this room, could we actually stand up and call philanthropy to the county? Now, folks are from Boston, and I've been here my whole life. I've seen the community call out the police. I've seen the community call out the fire department. I've seen the community call out elected officials. I have never seen, ever, one meeting where all the heads of philanthropy had a sitting in a meeting with us for us to tell them where they need to share their resources. We are funding 15,000 nonprofits, folks, versus funding the success of our children. I think the last thing that I would say is it's important that we're sitting here today, but I am going to say this, Maicharia, I'm going to say this, you're an extraordinary leader, and you love these young folks, and you do it right. I'd be damned that you're spending 60% of your time raising money and not spending the time doing what you do exceptionally well, which is educating our young folks. So, folks, what we do is when we leave here, how do we make sure that at least we could start here? And, folks, I know this because my guy Victor Martinez is in the back. Victor was the young person who grew up in the projects, right? And we already had a stereotype about the projects. Victor's a young person, right? And I didn't know he was going to be here. I just seen him, and my heart is full. Victor's that person that used sport as a vehicle. Victor was the one that didn't use issues to hold him back. Victor's the one that goes on to college and graduates. Victor is the one who's a personal trainer, spending more time talking to young folks about solving problems. Funny, Victor's changing more lives, and he has to worry every day about getting a job. He's the person I'd rather give $50,000 to today because he's going to make a difference. So again, I don't know the answers because I'm trying to figure out poverty, race, public education, and we can't figure this out. But what I do know is that if we come together collectively and we ever started a campaign for the success of our young folks in this city, and we get citizens and leaders like us that are as pissed off about Trump than we are about our kids, folks, we will change this city. You know it. We have done it before when we rally. So I don't know the answers. What I do know when I look out at this room and see who's here, if I can't get this done starting with us, then, folks, we're in trouble. So it only becomes a conversation. Everything will be, what do we do when we leave here tonight and tomorrow?
Thank you all for your thoughts this evening. I know we are have audience members that might be eager to also ask a few questions before we wrap up. So I would like to welcome, I've got Nikki who has a mic. If there are any folks that have a question that they would like to ask our panelists, can you just raise your hands? And we'll just ask you to keep your remarks brief.
One of the first things that this country has to recognize is our humanity as people.
That's right.
That's number one. They've never done it, and till this day, it's still not being done. If you do some research and you go to the 1968 Kerner Commission, that will tell you about the policies, pattern, and practice of the discriminatory, the racial, and everything going on with us as a race of people. If you go to the 1964 Federal Civil Rights Act and read 1 through 11 title, that will tell you everything that you need to use to straighten out everything that we're dealing with.
Thank you.
I think there's an intersectionality you guys are all getting at, but to the subject you were talking about, how do we engage our youth, right? I think one misconception that a lot of people have, especially our well-intended white allies, right, is that our youth, right, our inner city youth need to be saved somehow, right? And this man, Mr. Lewis, Coach, June, my man, he's done so much for me and for so many others in our community. He coached me for 6 years plus. And it wasn't him talking down to us. It wasn't him giving us, which he did, gave us a lot of lectures, right? But it wasn't so much that he talked down to us, but he prepared us, right? How to be men of integrity, men that he knew actually had our own resources, right? That we could all use, right? And I think that's another big problem that we have, is that we have the resources that we need, right? You mentioned all those nonprofits, all those organizations, right? All the great minds that we have in our community. But like, how do we pull that together, right? Like, that's where the big issue is. I'm kind of caught on a double-edged sword here, because I did come from the BPS system. I graduated from South Boston High, right? But right now I'm doing recruitment for a private school. And what I'm seeing is that our kids don't have the self-esteem and the courage to say that, yes, I deserve better, right? And there's no one, I'm not gonna say no one, but there's not enough people telling them, yes, you do deserve it. Yes, this is for you, right? And you deserve to go after it, right? So how do we begin to create more initiatives, right? How do we create more forums that are more appealing to the youth, right? Because they need to be a part of this conversation too. And it was one class I went to, and I was talking to these kids, and I'm like, what are you looking, when you think about education, what does that mean to you? And I had one kid, he said, oh, it's boring, right? So when you have kids telling you that, like, how do we make this system more engaging? And I think that's really where my question lies, and kind of like a whole thing to it.
Anyone want to?
Yeah, I thank you for that. It's about the resources, the fact that we do have the resources. I guess I started to say that we have to prepare our own children. We have to give our children the tools, and we have to believe in them. I am tired of people telling me what kids can't do. What they can't do MCAS, they can't do this, they can't do that. No, when I was a kid, they were like, you know what, you're gonna have to be better. You're gonna have to work twice as hard or 10 times as hard in order to prove yourself. It's in you, get it done. And to me, and if we don't do that, and it's not a system that's going to do that, it's us stopping on the street and talking to the young lady or talking to the young guy. I mean, we sort of walked away from that. Nobody's going to care if we don't care. And we don't stop averting them and pretending they're not there when you see them. Stop being afraid of them. You know, these kids are looking for you. You know, I'm telling you as a 54-year-old woman that it's tough feeling sometimes like you're invisible, okay, in a city. So be 13, 14, 15, and think about what that is like if you don't have someone at home on your tail telling them that you are somebody. That's what I think, just some basic things. Recognize the humanity in the young people that you see walk by this building. If we could start with just that exercise, try it. We're all so afraid of each other. For a minute, just when you see a young man, say hello. They're always startled when I say it. Say hello. You don't know what difference you made for that young man that day or that young lady that day. And some of them might be surly. That's all right, I love you anyway. Stop, you know what I mean? Somebody did that for me on Hartford Street in Upham's Corner. And I think it's at that basic level. It's at the church. So there's not going to be a program that gives kids self-esteem. Some of our kids, if you are living in some really tough spaces, some of them in this go to bed hungry. Walk into some of their houses someday and see that they're in America. They're on a dirty, soiled up mattress with no food in the house. That's what people are angry about. So you want to know why they're angry? Kids don't have a job, they don't have food, they don't have hope. Guess what? There's a larger community of people that didn't shoot each other, they just gave you a new president. Because they're angry too. They can't put food on the table. They can't take care of their children. There's a significant amount of people in America living like this today. And so we need to sort of take a breath and be human with each other. And stop telling these kids what they can't do.
I want to add something too, and sometimes it's who are we waiting for?
Yourself. Yourself.
So here's something, and I'm going to put some of my dear friends out. So here's Ron, Keith, Selvin. I seen it back, Eric. Where's Amari? When these brothers visit the base, they always speak to our young folks. Here's the other thing what I love talking about these brothers about and sisters is in Javier, who spent time with my young folks. See, I need to know your story because, folks, guess what? I'm going to tell them what it took for you to be successful. See, despite that, I can do that every day, right? I don't use the word at risk,
Thank you.
disadvantage, disservice.
Thank you.
All those things some theorists came up with and made millions of dollars to call my kids. So I call my kids, show up the base, we call them great and successful, right? The most common name of a black and Latino young person in America is data and statistics. That's what we call our kids. So what I want to make sure is that they're seeing leaders from the neighborhood who are coming out, and sometimes that's the little thing we can do. And I guess I'll just end like, who are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for? We don't need permission to have a level of humanity, to know each other's stories, to know each other's name. And folks, don't get caught up in this too. Here's the funniest thing. My staff are white. I have a lot of women working with young black and Latino men. When my young black and Latino men worry about or care about, if you love them,
That's right.
if you care about them. So this whole thing that someone says to me, but Robert, I'm not from here. Like, here's the thing, folks in Boston. Nobody knows where you're from unless you tell them. Seriously. So I'm just saying, what are we waiting for? Our young folks don't bite. Matter of fact, they're ready to open up their arms to embrace.
Thank you. I think one more, I know we have a few more questions. I believe we end at 8 though, right? So we'll take a couple more.
Well, sure, feed us. We'll hang out.
Get some pizza ordered.
I need to talk real fast. Some of you in this room actually know me already, or my daughter, but I need to say a lot real fast. I'm from Boston, graduated Boston Public Schools in 1970, and vowed if I ever conceived, I would never send a child to Boston Public Schools. My daughter was blessed to be able to go to the Advent School, which supposedly was founded in Beacon Hill to deal with the kinds of children we've just been talking about. Nevertheless, she started in kindergarten, and in first grade, she had a young white male spit in her face. When I went to the principal, he said, well, except for what he's done to your daughter, Joshua has made tremendous progress. It was enough for me. So I brought her to the only black independent school up in Fort Hill, which is called Page Academy, which they learn the 7 principles of Kwanzaa every single day, and one of her teachers is up there in the corner who Uses is blessed to have. But briefly, she was on a partial scholarship, but I guess they resented that this child's mother came to pick her up with a violin to go to New England Conservatory and study. They didn't know it was free, or that she went for piano practice at the same New England Conservatory. So you said, who are we waiting for? And of course, to Robert, I say myself, because you know the story, but some of you don't. What I did is I produced a cable TV show in which you had to be of color or helping the colored community, and my 6-year-old was the host until she was 12. That's empowering, because it says, I expect a lot of you. 6-year-olds whose feet can't even touch the floor, and you're interviewing Patti LaBelle, Charles Ogletree at Harvard Law, someone who was poor, much poorer than she would have ever been, who was a black male that graduated Harvard Dental School. I could go on, but I won't. But it's empowering to be there, or to go to Harvard or Northeastern, and I tell her at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you better listen, because either you're going to write a paper when you get home on the computer, or you're going to stand up and ask at least one intelligent question. And as she got older, it was bigger. She never, ever wrote a paper, because she stood up and she asked intelligent questions. That's an expectation I have of you. That's right. When we could not afford, because her father lost his high-tech job, I homeschooled my daughter for 2 years. But I let her, because I wanted to know why I was homeschooling her, take 1 or 2 classes at the Hurley School down the street when it wasn't as good as it is now. The teachers begged me to let her be in the graduation, begged me to let her be in the Black History Month program, during which she re-choreographed Revelations from Alvin Ailey and taught 12 of the worst kids, quote unquote. And I hadn't been Corey. So the expectation was high. She's been watching Revelation since she was 3. She knows it by heart. And do you know who did that best part that she loved the most with the umbrella? An Asian child from Beijing, China. The problem is many of you grow up and have a cultural deficit disorder. My child grew up in the South End. I was going to take advantage of it. At least it's diverse. So when her alcoholic math teacher, I forget if it's geometry or algebra, would not tutor her at Boston Latin Academy, because there's no way I was going to ever let her go to Boston Latin, because I knew how racist it was. I knew already, and I knew how I had trained her, and she would have gotten in trouble for speaking up over and over and over again. So I got Mr. Grams, who lives in the South End. I don't see him here, but he's a white male who, I guess he worked in the Exxon or something. But this white male man, middle if not upper class, tutored this little black girl who lives in Villa Victoria. She hosted the show at BNN for 6 years. She knows how to produce, how to edit, how to do all of those. But between Boston Public Schools, homeschool, charter school, I then encouraged her, along with someone else who heard her speak at a Boston School Committee thing. She was for 2 years on the Boston Public School Committee. And when she graduated Bentley University with a business degree that no one, including me, ever thought she'd go for, I thought she'd go for dance. She's now a manager at Boston University 35 years after I was there. I had a master's. She's making 4.5 times what I had with my master's, because mommy had high expectations, and fortunately, the village had high expectations.
That's exactly right.
And the last thing I'll say is there's also intra-hatred. There's people who still will call me and you high yellow, because we have fair skin and somewhat straight hair. We've got to start looking at Marie St. Fleur and say, she's in the family. There are people of color who come to this country and darker than me and say they're not black, no way, don't call me black. But there's a reason, because they've learned that if you call yourself black, it's not an asset. I'll stop, but there's so much to say. But the point is,
there's a
you've
lot
gotta
to say
start with
tonight.
yourself.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. I am just cognizant of the time, so how many questions? I'm looking at folks. I think we have questions up there too.
So My name is Ben Siegel. I'm a pediatrician, and I've been at Boston Medical Center for the last 44 years, and I deal with the kids of Boston. I want to do a shout out to this panel, but I want to challenge the panel and us all, because I think there are areas of critical importance for young people, and that is 0 to 4. I want to give a shout out to Rahn and the school department, because people need to know that the information about kids who are starting at 4 years of age with excellent education, the studies were done at Harvard School of Education, suggests that their executive functioning is terrific. And executive functioning and social emotional intelligence are more important for outcome than cognition. But I do think, as a city with all of these private nonprofits and everything else, and the Boston Foundation, that the city needs to come together so that every child born and every woman who's pregnant gets education, and these kids and their parents get nurturing in a variety of ways, because if you invest in the first 4 to 5 years of life, you get a much greater return on investment. And we have a lot of programs in the city that try to deal with 0 to 3, but it's not organized. And I know Ron is on a program called Boston Opportunities, and I'd love to hear Marie St. Fleur talk about this, but the city should come together around how we deal with this age group.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
And so Boston has a superintendent, and I'm a deep partner with the Boston Public Schools, but the mayor created my position because he realizes that there's ecological and ecosystem and cross-silo work to do. Part of the challenge is we barely work well in our silos. But I guarantee you the answers and the breakthroughs are at the intersections. And so we need to figure out how the health system is going to work with the education system. Where does economic development come into play? And so a lot of the things that Robert already talked about is a new body of work that we're going to have to figure out how to develop. I think Boston has a better chance than other places. Right. Boston has outsized resources, but it's small enough and relational enough to get this done. And so I'm proud to be doing this work and kind of connecting the dots. So I think we do have a shot, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, and I thank you for raising that issue. It's a passion of mine. You know what? Kids transform your life. I never would have thought about 0 to 4 if I didn't have 3. And because, you don't think about it until, you're trying to find childcare. And then you realize, and you start asking yourself, how do parents do this? And I have a support system, an amazing support system here in Boston of family, extended family, and friends. So as the doctor said, 0 to 4, I say 0 to 5 is so critical. And in this city, we have a mishmash of opportunities for kids. There's a lack of consistency. The bottom line is just creating a space for children to go is not sufficient. You need quality spaces and consistent educators. There's a 30% turnover rate approximately of educators in every center pretty much in Boston, and there's a shortage now in most of these centers in Boston. Why? Because, Marie's words, please, all right, because in professions that are predominantly held by women, we tend not to respect them as much, and we don't pay them. We do not pay these women, all right? Overwhelmingly, that's who are the people who are in these early education and care settings. We pay them somewhere between, depending what number you're looking at, $22,000 to $25,000 or $22,000 to $28,000 a year, all right? Now, mind you, many of them are there probably from 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock. I always say I was that parent. 5 o'clock, you're supposed to be there. 5:30, I'm on the phone saying, I'm on my way, please hold on to Justin. I'm coming, please, please, please. They never left him on the front stoop on his own, right? But they were always there ready for them. And the consistency of that adult, because particularly when they're that young, and and the doctor can talk all about, in terms of the particularly 0 to 18 months, the brain development that's necessary for us to be able to have them have those amazing executive functions, well, you need people who are engaged with those children during that period of time. It's not simply putting the people, you know, I was on a show today and somebody said, well, it's babysitting. Actually, no. And that's what I need your help in, to dissuade folks of this idea that it's simply babysitting so you can get a 14-year-old to just watch them. It's more than that. The engagement that you have to have with that infant in order to, all that goo-gooing and gagaing and all of that, I mean, you think, no, it matters. They're talking to you. And you know what I mean? And you're reacting to them and they're feeling your love, you know? And they're learning sound. And they're not feeling rejected. And so they're connecting with you in a certain way. I've been blessed with 3 children, and I've been in different points in my life when I've had to find care for them. And it matters the quality of the care. In Boston, we have a number of people doing that. There's no one really coordinating it in any real way. I'm delighted that the mayor has got the UPK program that's going. And I'm always saying I'm encouraged, but we've got to start early. That's part of the continuum. And we've got to start actually from birth, if not before, in order to make certain, particularly for kids who do not have the opportunities or the resources, who don't start at that equity place that we're talking about, that we give them more. So when you hear about this, that Ron has been talking about, support them, because it's necessary. We have to end this whole issue around remediation and rehabilitation, because if we know that if we start earlier, they're more likely to be successful on the other end, let's invest our money that way and invest it well so we don't continuously traumatize kids and give them the opportunity. Please, somebody tell you babysitting, tell them that is not so. Those educators have to be skilled to work with those children. I see Kimberly Haskins in the back from the bar.
You beat me to it.
I
You beat me
know,
to it.
I know, because I want to tell you, that sister has stood with us on early ed and have been amazing in helping us fund some of the amazing research that we've had on early education and care. And we're so grateful for your championship of early education, Kim. So it's good to see you. I haven't seen her. Happy New Year. So
not babysitting, it's
not
early
babysitting.
education.
It's early education.
Early
and care.
education.
And it matters.
One other quick
and we need
thing.
to fund it.
So if you want to actively help every young person in this city, every child get ready for a successful kindergarten entry in school, please tonight visit bostonbasics.org. So these are the 5 fundamental brain building practices that we need to be practicing with every child ages 0 to 3 to make sure that they are developmentally ready. You need to practice it with your grandchildren, your children,
Please.
your next door neighbors, your nephews and nieces. You don't need to buy another thing. You need the time and the dedicated interaction to do the things that science has proven contribute to brain building.
Thank you.
Can I just invite you to please visit one more site, Put Mass Kids First. I want you to join our coalition, Put Mass Kids First. And it really is about getting a focus on early education and care in this city and in this state so that we can have the investment that's necessary. We have consistently underfunded early education and care in this state, all right? And we need to do better. $500 million, I'm gonna give you an example and I'm gonna be quiet. We have 55,000 children on vouchers in Massachusetts. That's the way that we pay, that's the tuition that we give, the scholarship that we give to help them, all right? In the city of Boston, there's what, 65,000 kids in our school system?
57 in BPS, 75,000 overall.
Okay, 1.5 billion is the budget? So, can you hear me? Okay. So we need to do a little bit better. So please put Mass Kids First. Visit. Thank you.
My question is actually, this is kind of 3 questions in one. So we've been talking about a lot of different solutions and a lot of different things that we can do. I wanted to actually ask about how do we build the pipeline? I know that we've talked about race and it not really being about race, but I wanted to bring the race piece back because we have a lot of people who are not people of color motivating our students or trying to support our students. So one example, I oversee Gateway Cities. I also work with a lot of Boston public schools. And most of the people educating our students, most of the people working with our students, most of the people in nonprofits in the 15,000 that we have are not people of color. I work in one, and we have very few people of color, and part of the work that we're doing is to try to increase that. So number one, the question is, how do we build that pipeline? Number two is, how do we start to break down on the stereotype as to why aren't more of the institutions who serve our youth of color hiring our people of color? And number three, how are we losing our young people? So we support with the college process. I have a lot of students who are going to college and then coming back. Where are we losing them in between this process? Are we just deciding not to hire them? What are we doing with our young people that are going to college? And so yeah, I know that's a lot of questions in one.
No, thank you.
I guess one thing I would say is, let's find the organizations. There's a lot of them that do it and do it well. And I've seen this in the city. There's folks that do it well. You know, when we turn around and we'll use issues around diversity, and nonprofits and funders will fund them, and a lot of the folks who fund it, if you look at their boards and you look at their leadership, you know, sometimes I don't know. I start thinking, are we bold and courageous enough to do things? I know you aspire. I know organizations. So I'll be selfish for a second, and I'll say the base. Our director of education, I met when she was 13, told her if she goes to college, graduates, she has a job. My program associate, I met at 9. My son, who's a graduate, works for me. Every one of our young folks are graduates who grew up in the Villa Victoria South End. We have 16 staff. We probably have 2 people of color. My board chair was African American. Matter of fact, my vice chair was Latina. The MC at our event was Latina. We have to have the courage sometimes to stand more. I also think one of the things, too, is what I struggle with is I don't talk about us hiring around diversity. I love to say there's extraordinary leaders. And when I find folks who come to me to say they're not out there, I don't say they're not out there. It's you don't have the networks. There's an issue with the networks, right? Because there's a lot of folks who know talented folks. Again, and I'm going to say this again, don't tell me Ron's great because he's an African American. I'm excited about Ron is brilliant. Maicharia is brilliant.
Thank
Maria
you.
is
Keep
brilliant.
saying that. I like that.
No, but Ron, but honestly, we don't say that enough about our folks in positions of leadership. The other thing that I would probably say is that I remember when I grew up in the South End. It's very interesting. Some will remember Chuck Turner. Chuck Turner used to teach a course in organizing, in leadership. And I remember back in the day, nonprofit leaders would be in those same trainings, and they would be actually mentoring us, training us. I'm a Mel King kid. There's hundreds of us. Jorge Hernandez from IBA helped to raise me. So they're everywhere. I think one of the things we need to do is, I believe, we're spending so much time building nonprofits, so much time independent. We're doing 1,500 goals that, again, I don't think sometimes it's this commitment of shifting the change of the success of our young folks.
So can I just touch on this just a little bit differently? And I agree, but I do think we have to be intentional about our hiring. And so one of the things growing up in Boston, it's that this whole networking thing that I guess is new now has been going on forever. And so, you know, this whole idea around affirmative action is not just about black folk, it's about relationships, wherever you are. And so in Boston, oftentimes it's who you know opens the door. I don't say that it gets you in the seat, but it opens the door. And oftentimes our young people don't have anyone to open that door for them, okay? And oftentimes their resume is just another resume. There's nobody picking up the phone and making that phone call. And they say, you know what? She went to school with my kid. One, at least give her the courtesy of a phone call, of an interview. What happens in that interview then is up to you and for you to be ready. That's why I say everybody go see Hidden Figures. Be ready. That's why. Go see it, please. It's one of my most favorite things. So I think that's really important. And so that the other thing is our willingness. So understanding that, you know, most of you, all of you who've hired, how many of you have always had somebody that calls you and say, do you know somebody or whatever, and you give them the opportunity? Most of these kids don't have that, right? And then the other thing is, how intentional are we, therefore, when we get that pile of resume, that we're making certain that we pull 2 or 3 out of those resumes in order to give that person a shot? where we would give the people that were comfortable with mirror, mirror on the wall. I went to BC. I promise you, if you're a BC kid, I get a tingle.
will take
I get a tingle when I get a resume that says BC. Okay, let me tell you. So I'm just saying, I always talk about mirror, mirror on the wall. We tend to go with what we're comfortable with. We have in our hiring practices and processes, be willing to be uncomfortable and think about how we're going to create that discomfort for ourselves so we can bring these young people. Most of our young people who graduate, who are people, they leave because they don't feel they have an opportunity here. I know, I've got 3. And it's really the saddest thing for me after all this work, because they don't feel that there's a place for them in this town. And you know why? And part of them is their stubbornness, because they don't want mama to make a call. But that's just the reality of it, okay? But that's they have an option. Many of our kids do not have that option, okay? They have no option. And so I'm begging you to then go back and take a look, and then put in place in your space the coaching opportunity for them. So we look at it and we don't want to take a chance on that kid, because they don't fit whatever that mold is in our head about what we think that job ought to be. And so we're not going to take that chance. But for another, because there's a level of comfort, you know, it might be subliminal, but it's there. So we take that shot. So I'm asking you to take a chance and then put in place in your workspace the opportunity to coach. If you really mean to change the way things happen in your space, then you have to put people who are willing to take that person under their wing in order to support them. You have to build the support in there for that young person who's coming in, who may not have an aunt and uncle at home to go and ask the question about something that's happened to them and how can they do better. So they need a coach in that space. So I think you have to be intentional about that. And then it is about your network, figuring out, take a look at who you're talking to and say, if you want people of color to apply, well, who is your recruiter? How successful has your recruiter been in being able to bring you a pool of applicants that have people of color in
And
it?
they can't be considered the diversity hire.
Thank
I'm
you.
just being real. They can't be, or the promotion is a diversity promotion.
Yeah.
Because we have to have
Yeah.
this.
So you feel-
So
check.
if you do that and you choose to do that, remember they're extraordinary employees of your company. And it is, we were saying, lonely again, to know your success is measured by others because of just the diversity. And what I would say, Marie, sorry, Ron, I would say it's not even about taking a chance. It's about, look back, someone took a chance on you. It's about opportunities and access.
So I'm going to say something really oxymoronic. I have 5 quick things for you. So 5 quick things doesn't sound quick. First of all, the teaching profession. Young people are being told the teaching profession is not viable. 2004, 11% of undergrads were saying they intended to go into teaching. Today, that's 4% of all undergrads. So teaching is in crisis. So we've got to figure out how we reinvigorate it and make it where it is not a viable option, and to also tell the story about why it is probably the noblest profession as well, and well rewarded when we get it right. Secondly, we've got to challenge the schools of ed. The schools of ed are not diverse at the faculty level or at the student level. It is expensive to train to be a teacher. And it is expensive to train if you are in Boston, Massachusetts, where you are making next to no money and expected to do your student teaching, et cetera, et cetera. So it takes a certain amount of privilege to train to be a teacher in Boston and in America. So we've got to figure that out. And we also have to challenge the schools of ed around what they are training teachers for. And so I'm not sure that they're preparing them for some of the work. I think they're preparing them for the challenging work, but they're not necessarily preparing them for the inspiring work that comes with teaching. And so teachers are going to need the support. We need to challenge them to be trained the right way. I'm happy to report that BPS is improving, and so we see the recruitment numbers improving, and they're getting better about strategies, everything from instituting a high school program that allows you to take a sequence of steps to eventually teach. UMass thinking about its undergrad student of color population and how they're going to become BPS's STEM teachers, in the future. But we still got to think outside of the box. So this piece about networks, they know some networks to tap. They don't know all networks to tap. And so I think we're going to have to figure out where are those non-traditional spaces that we're going to have to continue to pull the next generations of professionals from. The other problem I will call out is the retention problem. So even where we've got an uptick in professionals of color coming into administrative and teaching positions, we aren't keeping many of them. And I would say, especially among our senior teachers, there's probably been a disproportionate rate of them being evaluated out of schools, not only in Boston, but nationwide. So we can get better on one end, but if we don't retain them, then it'll be a wash from a net standpoint.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Can we just another applause for our panelists? So I am sincerely grateful to have you guys here tonight and to just embrace this conversation with me and this fabulous audience that we have. And there's just so much in what we talked about that doesn't stop tonight, that we need to continue, not just to talk about what we did today, but to really think about the action items that we have on our plates to do as human beings. One of the things, as the president and CEO of the organization, United South End Settlements, I've been here, it will be my 2-year anniversary, actually, February 1st. Thank you. But one of the things that drew me to, there were many things that drew me to this organization, but one of the things that drew me to the organization was its longevity in this community. We are celebrating 125 years. This year is our 125th anniversary. And it's an organization that has historically just transformed lives. It's an organization, as I'm learning, and what drew me to the organization, that wasn't concerned about the strategic planning, wasn't concerned about the fundraising. It was concerned about making sure that children and their families were doing well, that they were succeeding. And I appreciate Robert really talking about the 15,000, I mean, I knew it was a lot. I knew Boston had 15,000 nonprofits. We're in the business of creating nonprofits. We need to be in the business of creating change. And instead, we've kind of tilted and shifted to a very different model. And I think about my own pressures and what I have to do. It is focused on running an organization. It is not focused on impacting lives, although I fight that because that's why I do the work we do. The other thing that I'm reflecting on with an organization that's 125 years old is that we are actually doing some of these things at United South End Settlements. And it's the other piece that brought me to this organization, as we talked about diversity, which is sometimes an overplayed word. But when you walk into our early childhood education program and our after-school program, Miss Casey, raise your hand proudly, because she's amazing.
Thank you, Casey.
We have, first of all, some of the most dedicated, caring staff, like number one, the most important thing. And then our beautiful children come from all different backgrounds. I see some of our parents here tonight. And we have this opportunity to create a social structure, as you're talking about, Marie, that we don't get to do in Boston, that is 51% or more now minority city, which I never understood that term, how you can be a minority majority. I didn't get that, never got that. But we, in our organization, have this beautiful opportunity to be bringing people from different walks of life and what that means for each participant and their family. Not just those kids we label lower income or families that are lower income. And then thinking about what you had said around our children needing to be saved, like that's the mentality that we approach this. So there's a lot of requests the panelists asked of you tonight. One last from me is, we've got to change that. We are not saving anybody. We are looking at potential. Our children have the greatest potential, and we need to believe in them. And we need to create the opportunities for them to succeed instead of thinking we have to save them. It's a very different mentality. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. Feel free to stay around, connect, and talk to one another. And then I just challenge you to not end the conversation here. Tomorrow, have this conversation. Take it back to your friends, your neighbors, to other communities. Bring people in who you don't know, who don't look like you. The mirror is an important one to think about. And one last thing I completely forgot to mention was this is the first Mari's looking at me like, yes, Maicharia, you're supposed to mention this. This is the first Harriet Tubman forum. And we decided that this was important for us as an organization celebrating our 125th, being in the Harriet Tubman house. You all know who Harriet Tubman it was, and what she means to equity is equity and justice. And we have now the Harriet Tubman forums on race this year that we will be continuing throughout the year on a quarterly basis. So this is just the first of many to bring everyone together. So thank you again to our extraordinary panelists. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I just hope you have a wonderful couple of days. Get through this weekend. You can do it.
Thank you.
So,
I stayed out of trouble, got my degree, didn't have any children out of wedlock, as society says that us black males do. I did all the right things, and when I had a couple instances in my early 20s over a couple of weeks with the police, and I realized it didn't matter what I did. I was still going to be looked at as this segment of society that is lesser.